Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to continue our series of expectations, which we talk about 2 players per episode, one from the offense, one from the defense, with a local analyst. Joining me here today is Kyle Barber to talk about Tyler Linderbaum and Broderick Washington. Tyler, how you doing? I'm sorry.
I'm doing well.
Kyle, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It's a good start to the summer. I think we're finally going to get some decent weather. I know we're recording this a little bit in a delay, but the summer is enjoyable, and we just finished up some holidays, so I'm happy.
Yeah, horrible heat wave right now going into Baltimore. I don't know if you're okay with this or not. I'm not real good with hot, but anyway, we just happened to get back from Africa. That's where we've been the last couple of weeks, and it was cool there. We're right on the equator, and it's between 58 and about 72 degrees for pretty much the whole time we were there. And there it's about as cold as it gets there. But anyway, in Kenya, so a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's wild. Holy cow.
Well, anyway, let's move on and talk about Tyler Linderbaum a little bit in terms of what's going on with him. He's entering his second season. Definitely had what I would call a plus rookie campaign. A lot of people, calling it even better than that. I would say the most important thing is that it's a great place to start for him in terms of what he accomplished in this rookie year.
Yeah, excellent rookie campaign. Showed up and became that first round center and set into an offense that needed an anchor at that position, needed somebody to be there for multiple seasons. And he, showed up, played just about every snap, I believe, and proved that he can be the guy. He can, keep the ball safe, which was a problem all throughout the Ravens, centers the past few seasons. And not only just doing so, but was solid in his blocking too. Overall was a rather successful blocker. His run blocking was rather efficient, and he still has stuff to grow and develop. But there was nothing that was so critical that he became a failing prospect at any spot. He just has places and areas to develop, which is an excitable trait among somebody that's already so talented.
Yeah, I mean, I agree in large part there that there's a top tier run blocker already there. He's 100% as advertised in terms of the quickness, ability to get out to level 2, which really helped. He's a great guy to be on the front end of a combination block, meaning he's leaving and moving to level 2. Size is not ideal, and obviously a lot of his success in the NFL is going to be determined on how he's able to withstand larger men, both larger and longer, and we'll see in the coming years. I think that that's obviously a lot we'll talk about here today. The snaps, I think you maybe mentioned it directly, but you were certainly referring to it. I think in terms of the ball was delivered terrifically well, night and day. Relative to Bozeman, who I thought, not a bad center, but, this was a weakness of him, was delivering kind of a 12-6 curveball snap. Linderbaum, much more in terms of line drives, much fewer outside and high snaps, and low snaps in particular also had given Jackson a lot of difficulty, but snaps are on the money. And it's something that's easy to kind of forget is how bad the situation was before Tyler got here.
Yeah, that was something that in training camp in seasons past, that was something that, journalists and reporters were keeping track of how many were occurring on any given day or week. And instead, this turned into how many occurred in the totality of training camp. And I went, oh man, Tyler Linderbaum had his first bad snap. This one went errant. It's 3.5 weeks into it. In the training camp, and everybody was like, oh wow, this is something to be concerned about. I was like, this is the first bad snap in 3.5 weeks, and over the course of the season, I believe I remember 1, maybe 2 that were strugglesome, but that's far superior than 1 or 2 every couple games and in key situations as we saw in seasons prior.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's so nice to have that cleaned up. Linderbaum, in terms of his actual play, and of course, I score offensive line play on a game-by-game basis. A lot of week-to-week variation in his game. By the way, that's not unusual. There's a lot of week-to-week variation in Kevin Zeitler. There's a lot of week-to-week variation in Ben Powers. I mean, so there was for Tyler as well, and a lot. It really spread the whole range. But one of the things that stood out about his play is he didn't really have any fall off the table, fall out of sight games, and games that would fall into the low F range. He did have a couple of high F games, but they're a couple of games that they're sort of games where he's given trouble by bigger men, and I that kind of consistency has real value where your score never drops 20 or 30 or 40 points below the pass mark at the position. So from that standpoint, definitely very consistent for the season. I think there is a pretty strong difference between his run and pass blocking that we'll check into over 2023.
Yeah, that was the thing. You've alluded to it a couple times, is that he struggles with guys that have size on him. His worst games in pass blocking were, his first game, which was against the New York Jets. He had struggles against the Giants. He's had struggles against Tampa Bay and Pittsburgh and Atlanta as well. I can't quite remember if it was Grady Jarrett that did that with Atlanta, but nonetheless, that's with Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Vita Vea. Those are huge guys, really talented pass rush capable defensive tackles that were able to cause a stir on somebody that is a smaller center, and that's something that he has to develop. And it's admirable enough that he's able to handle just about everybody else but those enormous, big, talented D tackles that are so few in the NFL.
I think actually there's kind of a lot of them in the NFL, is that you face them all the time, whereas in college he had more of a break from that. He obviously had a number of things he did in college which helped him deal with larger men, with longer men, both, and those things aren't all going to work at the NFL level. The athletes are just better, and he's going to have to do more to deal with them. The AFC North has traditionally had some very big men playing in the middle of defensive lines, starting with Haloti Ngata here in Baltimore as being a guy who would have given Linderbaum fits, I think, in terms of his size. But here's what I would say about it. Almost every Ravens offensive lineman who I've looked at over the years has improved during their time after showing some initial value. And a lot of players didn't show that initial value in year one. Linderbaum was plugged in, played virtually every snap his first year. So you mentioned, I think he might have missed 2 snaps. I mean, Powers, I believe, was the only guy who played every snap in the maybe in the entire league this last year. But anyway, he's the only guy on the Ravens who played every snap. And Linderbaum is a guy who, compares favorably to a lot of the guys who over the course of 2 or 3 years really became much better players. And I think that trajectory is available to Tyler because there's a lot of improvements still to make, obviously, as a pass blocker. And I think he possibly could do it. But I want to go through some of the names that the Ravens have drafted since 2000. And a lot of these guys fell in the era where I was scoring offensive line play. So I'm feeling qualified to talk about the improvement in them. But you start with Edwin Mulatalo in 1999, Casey Roback, Tony Pashos, Jason Brown, Chris Chester, Jerry Gaither, a guy taking the supplemental draft who became really good his second season and his third. Yanda, Grubbs, Kelechi Osemele, Ricky Wagner, Ryan Jensen. These are all guys who, some of them were higher round picks, but they're certainly not all that. A lot of these guys are mid-round guys. Ronnie Stanley, a first-round guy. Jermaine Illuminor is a guy who got better and eventually got a starting role with the Patriots and with other teams. Bradley Bozeman, Orlando Brown, and Ben Powers. It's incredible group for development. And we look at the Ravens and their ability to develop wide receivers, and we kind of scoff at it. And I think it's also occasionally time to have a little Thanksgiving on this and talk about how good they've been at developing offensive linemen. I think Linderbaum certainly can make progress from where he was in this first year, and his starting point is fantastic.
Yeah, undoubtedly what the Ravens have done with producing offensive line talent is among the NFL's best. Each time they draft a prospect, they turn him into a depth piece, if not something greater. And you're talking about the draft picks, but they've also hit on the undrafted free agents at times. Patrick McCary comes to
Yep.
mind for me right now. But overall, you mentioned all those names, and those guys go and either they remain with the Ravens and they produce consistently for seasons to come, or you have guys that go around the NFL and make big money and have earned those paydays, as you've seen now with Powers, as you saw with Kelechi Osemele, Ryan Jensen, the names that you mentioned.
Wagner. Yep.
So Joe D'Alessandris and what he's done with the program and how he's turned it not into just building a single season roster, but it becoming a full program for that team to consistently churn out talent and gain value for themselves, both on the field and capital elsewhere if they have to trade or they get the compensatory picks from those guys signing contracts elsewhere. That's been a huge boost for this program and for the franchise writ large.
Yeah, all ways that the Ravens have gained Ben Bredesen, a guy they drafted and traded before he'd really gotten any play to the team. So there've been lots of ways they've extracted value from their ability to identify offensive line talent. I remember back to Nick Easton, an undrafted guy they traded before he even played a snap with the Ravens in his first training camp. He got traded to the 49ers. He lasted for a number of years in the NFL in terms of hanging around. I would, though, not be being honest about the situation if I just handpicked the successes. There have been some failures, and I just want to point to them and kind of there are some common threads in them I want to talk about. The guys that did not improve. Terry was drafted and actually, never really became a better player than he was. O'Neal Cousins comes to mind as a guy who did not improve. Ramon Harwood, Gradkowski. Urschel, honestly, was at his best in his first season and really declined from there. So that was, honestly, a reversal of the usual path. And Lewis and Tyree Phillips. The other one who is the biggest elephant in the room was a guy I think they kind of screwed up his career themselves, but I'm not sure exactly who to blame. Michael Orr, his career is very much a ski slope. Had his best year as a rookie. Looked honestly like he could have been a Hall of Fame right tackle if he'd have stayed there. Between himself, his agent, and the careless attitude towards the game that Jared Gaither had, he got moved to left end to right tackle a couple of different times over the years, most notably during the Super Bowl run. He's moved back to right tackle to make room for McKinney during the playoffs. But an odd career from Orr, and honestly one I thought was not fully maximized within the Ravens. It's really the only one I could point to where an extraordinarily talented player who didn't maximize what he brought to the field.
Yeah, that's certainly the case for Orr, and you going over Urschel just reminds me of that was a clear sign of a player a personal conflict and personal desires impacting with professional pursuits that clashed distinctly with one another, as he had pursuits of great skill in mathematics and a brilliant mind, and then there's also the impact of literally playing football, which is known to cause brain damage, and that was something that he was highly concerned at as a person, and he didn't know whether or not he wanted to be in football or didn't want to be in football, and there was struggles regarding that, and ultimately, he's off working in mathematics nowadays and working in a field that is essentially the NFL of his field, just not on a gridiron instead.
Oh, good for him, and I'm glad he did. I know Urschel comes from a family that I think his father was an academic as well and a mathematician, so it seems to make sense. And that was really at the height of the fear of concussions. And I'm not saying, we take CTEs lightly at this point, but he was coming into the league at that point.
Yeah, he was the guy that I heard rumor of that when he was going through and making plays and after a particular game, he suffered a head injury, I believe. And, afterwards, a few months after, like, how are you feeling? He's like, I'm pretty much 100%. The only thing is I can't go with my partner, my significant other, and play chess in our heads against one another, is what I heard, because that's to the effect, that's how, wise this individual was, and he couldn't just play chess in his mind against his partner. Instead, he was like struggling to do so, but he said everything else was it. So that was, I assume, part of the the intention of leaving football behind. But I thought that was one of the most impressive things, because so few individuals I know are able to play chess in their heads other than watching, videos of grandmasters on YouTube doing so against players. It was a wild to hear somebody to have that ability.
Yeah, it's very apparent from his book that he really loved to play games much more broadly than just chess. It's just something. There's something stigmatizing about playing games that I think he almost didn't want to admit in his book as much. But there's a whole bunch of games apparently he was really into, Splendor and other things, and games that you might have heard of today. And the entire next generation after me, and this probably means you, Kyle, because you're the next generation after me, grew up on Settlers of Catan and not Monopoly. People my name all know Monopoly, Risk, all those games that basically were around in the 1970s and into the 80s. The people your age, I think, largely know Settlers of Catan and a bunch of other different games you could probably tell me about.
I think we started on Monopoly. I certainly started on Monopoly. That was always the introductory game. And then in my late teens is when somebody's like, "Oh, you've never played Settlers?" So I think I was a part of it. I wasn't in the correct crowd originally, but yes, I certainly got to Settlers afterwards and have had my fair share of enjoyment at that table.
Okay. I've played Settlers of Catan, I think twice now, and that's both during the last 3 years. So I've just, as an older gentleman, been introduced to it. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about one thing that'll come out is that PFF has Tyler Linderbaum ranked fairly highly among their centers, and one of the things that they do is to aggregate scores in a way that kind of hides some of that pass blocking weakness. They do several things that are true. First of all, because they want to differentiate centers, and centers don't generally give up a lot of total pressure events, they combine scores with a higher weight for run blocking than for pass blocking. And I have talked to various people at PFF. They can't give me a good explanation of exactly why they do it, and it does not match up with any sort of leverage that I can find in it. So I don't beat on PFF about it. I like their model in general. I like to compare offensive linemen, but I would recommend people separate pass and run blocking scores for guards and centers in particular, because the aggregation of those scores follows a leverage weighting that I just don't agree with. So look at the pass and run blocking scores separately. They're very good. They're looking at the same things that I'm looking at. They score it similarly. They do that. The other thing they do is they underweight penalties. And so he was tied for sixth in the NFL in penalties. It's actually a weakness of his. So it's something he's really got to clean up going into 2023. But I'm not bashing the PFF models. I just want to tell people, what you're looking at when you see that isn't necessarily a great representation. You're better off looking at the individual pieces with regard to their model.
And that was something that, if you wanted to get to the good year, great year, that was on both of them. Is a good year is just to have fewer penalties, because he had 6 last season, and it's clear that maybe he missed another 1 or 2 that I think were pretty borderline when you were watching the games. He would get his hands jammed into jerseys on these bigger guys like we were talking about, and got away with a couple, it felt like, and every offensive lineman gets away with a few, but he was fighting in the trenches on some of them and losing throughout points of his rookie season. And something that I found intriguing that I wanted to mention about him is when we spoke to him during minicamp, he's coming back at the same weight. I thought he might want to be a little bit bigger. That's just the expectation when he's 6'2", 305 pounds. And we asked him, like we asked just about everybody else, are you wanting to play at a lighter weight or a heavier weight, depending upon what you're looking for, your advantages? And he said, no, I'm still at 305. That's where I'm playing. And I found that to be a bit curious because, the Ravens are known for having bigger, heavier, stronger offensive linemen, but maybe in Monken's system, they want to continue to have him at a lighter weight. They like his speed and his agility, and if they add any more weight on his frame, it doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense, and it'll just kind of decrease in those areas maybe, or fluctuate it to where he doesn't have the necessary ability that he's so good at 305.
It's that is an interesting choice, and he would probably have to give up some quickness to put on any significant amount of weight. And even if he did, if he put on 10 pounds, let's say, or 12 pounds, and you're pressing the limit of just how much he could do in terms of the weight room, and add, maybe over 4 years he could put on 15 pounds or something, but he'll still be the same length. The length will still be an issue. So he needs to deal with first contact being initiated by that defensive player. And that's where he needs, regardless of what weight he had, he still needs to figure that out, even if he's a little bit heavier. We did definitely see a lot in this first season. He's fourth overall by PFF in terms of run blocking out of 31 centers who had at least 679 snaps pass block. It was half of the highest total in the league. Mm-hmm. He's 29th out of 31 as a pass blocker. So this is not a small problem. It really is something he needs to improve at. On the other hand, I think there's a great example in the league who would give hope of this. And it's one of the players he was comped to right in the draft. And that's Garrett Bradbury, who's now played 4 years for the Vikings. But he was a first round draft pick who also extremely short armed, a lot of comps to Linderbaum. A lot of people said Linderbaum was better than Garrett Bradbury, but that's always what they say when a guy's already failed at the NFL level. So you kind of expect that. But Bradbury had 3 very difficult years in the NFL, much worse as a pass blocker than what Linderbaum just suffered through, even though Linderbaum was obviously not good in that respect. And he then broke out in his 4th year and was pretty close to a league average pass blocker. It would be nice to see that kind of a trajectory for Tyler in terms of him being able, evenly or unevenly, to improve by as much as Garrett Bradbury did, given what a comp the two are for each other.
Right. I had a question for you, Ken. Do you think part of it with the pass blocking struggles had to do with any sort of scheme in regards to Roman? And do you think that Monken's system could alleviate any of that? Or is it kind of cut and dry and he's struggling in this against, players that are just longer than him and stronger tthan him in areas?
Yeah, I think Monken's system will make it worse. So really? Here's why. Yes, because there's going to be more pass plays for starters, so that's bad. Mm-hmm. But then there's another change going on that's a big one on the offensive line. Left guard is opening up. Whoever they get is not going to be as good a pass blocker as Ben Powers was. Ben Powers was excellent as a pass blocker, and also, by the way, way underrated by PFF because the weighting for pass blocking and run blocking is not right, just in the other direction. Yep. And you see, so he was a guy who earned a huge contract from Denver, and I think there are 2 things about the positioning of Tyler Linderbaum that was just outstanding for his rookie year. One is playing behind next to 2 much larger men in terms of Zeitler and Powers. And I think he would do well to have Cleveland be the guy for that reason, is that, it's a much bigger man. The handoff of combination blocks, it really helps to have differences in physical type of the offensive lineman. So I think that he would benefit tremendously if he and Cleveland are working on combination blocks together. If Zeitler is already a situation I think that will work. So, but that left guard situation is also going to create a lot of desire for other defensive coordinators to try and run over that A gap on that side. And how they'll do it is they'll have players cross the face of Linderbaum or of the guard and crash into that gap. Well, if they're crashing into the shoulder of Linderbaum, that's exactly where he had a lot of trouble, is picking up those stunts last year. And I think it's now so obviously the weak point of the Ravens offensive line without Powers that it will become a bigger issue. So it's going to be a struggle. I think it actually will be a very steep learning curve for Tyler this year to try and hold up at the same level, or hopefully a little better than he did last year as a pass blocker, with somebody of an unknown quality, playing left guard next to him.
That makes a lot of sense. Right now, it feels like the Ravens are locking into more John Simpson and Sala, the rookie, Big Sala. Simpson 6'4", 321. So he's got some decent size to him. He's a big guy out there, so that could maybe do it. And I think not to only be doom and gloom. That's a very good, like you gave astute points, of course, but just for your audience, I think one of the biggest perks that the Ravens do have that allows this to not be all nightmarish is just the dominance of Ronnie Stanley at left tackle is able to, one-on-one just about anybody, and he's able to just be so good at left tackle that he doesn't often need a guard to shade over his side, and instead that frees up a left guard to help out the center more, because when two people are asking for help between Ronnie Stanley or Linderbaum with more frequency, it is most certainly not Stanley that is asking to get the extra help on the outside so much. So that could be beneficial. But like you said, it's going to be a steep learning curve regardless. More pass plays solely on itself means that he's going to have more challenges to come for 2023 and beyond.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree on that. And to your point about Ronnie Stanley, he is a terrific ball player. Most processing of this type moves inside out in terms of the look. That's something I really latched onto with Ben Cleveland at Georgia, was that he was a good and quick processor in that way, that he started with his hand on the defensive tackle nose, usually that's being blocked by the center, and he's looking, looks to level two, see if a blitz is coming. This is when a guard bubbles on that side, looks to see if there's a stunt coming, and then moves over. And if he can feel that the center has got that block taken one-on-one, then he moves over to the help block on the tackle. And even Ronnie Stanley against top guys is going to need some help. But there are differentiations, and you're absolutely right that Ronnie Stanley doesn't need as much help as, say, the first half of 2018. We saw James Hurst needing help play after play after play when they had him inexplicably at right tackle in front of Orlando Brown for about half the season.
Oh yeah,
I'm still a little bitter about it. You can hear it.
That was a little bit something.
Well, let's go on and talk about what's a good season, what's a great season for Tyler here. Why don't you go first? Tell me what a good season would look like to you.
Yeah, a good season is remaining talented in run blocking. A lot of these times, we simply talk about like, oh, they got to get better everywhere. Like, no, he was really good. And just being able to remain at that threshold is a very good thing from Linderbaum, because he was damn good at that last season. A rookie year, and he was already being able to move, get into the second levels at times. You saw just how he was able to put people into the dirt, which was impressive. And just being able to remain at his ability in the run blocking game, I think would be more than enough in that regard. You talked about splitting up run blocking and pass blocking, and I think that's what you have to do with these good year, great years. Penalties need to decrease. He had 6. He could have been called for a few more, as I said. So I think you got to have those to a minimum. Of course, 3, 4, you get a miscommunication, you snap the ball, you delay of game and it's on the center one time, you get a couple holds because you're just going up against a guy big or two. It's just going to happen, in a 17 game season. It's really hard to go penalty free when you are fighting a war in the trenches. As many snaps as he did, over 1,000 last year, almost 1,100 snaps last season. So to a minimum is what I can say in that fairness. Pass blocking, it's got to be like a good year is to be top 20 as a center, and I know that's not great, but that's still 9 spots higher than what he was as a center, which is not excitable, of course, but that's good, especially if his volume and pass blocking is going to have to be skyrocketed so much. Like, of course you want him to be top 16. I think that's ultimately where you need your players to perform, is better than half the league. But even jumping 9 spots and no longer being such a vulnerability, I would say is a good year out of Linderbaum.
This is so similar. I'm just going to read it verbatim because it's very similar. But run blocking continues to be excellent despite fewer run snaps. So no difference there effectively. Here's the one thing I added: does not allow the new left guard to drag down his play. So if the new left guard becomes a target for A-gap stunting and whatnot, or blitzes through that gap that somebody's got to pick it up. He can't allow the fact that this left guard's not doing his job at a high level to impact his own play. He needs to, and honestly, he needs to pick up some of that for a left guard if the Ravens have a bad guy there. They're going to have a less experienced guy there at the very minimum. The other thing, pass blocking improves to the third quartile, I said, which is exactly what you're saying. You're saying he's not going to be in the top half, but he's going to move up 9 spots. It's perfect. If he was, the 35th to 40th percentile guy in the entire league this year, I think that would be a notable improvement. And with the increased number of passing snaps, I think it's very important that he make an improvement like that. If he's going to take a real step forward in this year. It could be, this is a flat year, kind of a treading water year where he's about as good as he was as a rookie because general circumstances got more difficult. I don't even think that would be terrible by any means, but I think people might be a little bit frustrated if he has a similar year as a pass blocker. Maybe not. Maybe they'll be okay with it. And your point about the penalties is good. I had a note of that in his great season. So why don't you take us into great and what that means to you?
Great is if he can improve on run blocking more than what he's already done. I mean, you saw at times just watching like Brian Baldinger does the breakdown. So you of course have your breakdowns and your fan base of course is tuning into that. But like you've watched the clips and the highlights of that, and to see more of them just bullying, at the first line, getting to a linebacker, getting to a safety in the backfield as he opens up on fewer runs. That's what's to expectation this season. That's it. And in pass blocking, if you can get to being a top 16 guy, that's where I'm at, top half of the league, because anything more is superb, but I'm not here to put outlandish expectations. As top 16 center, jumping up that many spots to show that you can be upper echelon in run blocking, you can be superior to almost everybody at one area, and you can be just as good as most in another one, still has you as one of the best centers in the NFL. And the penalties, I'd say if you can get two or fewer would be a great year. Just being able to avoid the anything unnecessary and being disciplined, no longer being impacted by the noise. That was something that it seemed to have impacted Linderbaum, and he kind of talked about, I believe, in the locker room sessions that we spoke to, saying just it's so loud, and John Harbaugh made a mention of just how volatile some away stadiums were, and the noise impacting the rookies. And I felt like he was encompassing Linderbaum more specifically with that, just because of what the importance of his job specifically in his role. So I think that would be a great year for me.
Those are pre-snap penalties are annoying, certainly to speak of. But when you look at pre-snap penalties, like compare a 5-yard false start or a 5-yard late snap that causes a delay of game penalty. Either of those is 5 yards at the only. Okay. The other side of the coin is like an IDP penalty, illegally downfield, that occurs post snap. Those penalties are a lot more serious, even though they're also 5 yards. They give the defense the option of take the play or not. And so for that reason, I'm more lenient on pre-snap penalties. But so if 3 false starts, combination with a delay of game penalty, whatever it is, that's fine. What I want to avoid is the holding calls, and I want to avoid the IDP calls that come with an RPO offense. The Lamar, not making it clear to anybody, including the offensive lineman, if he's holding the ball and throwing it, or if he's if they're free to release. The Ravens I think they have some work to clean that up generally in their offensive line play. The IDPs are a big risk for this team, and they can end up stalling drives. So it's something they need to get better at. But I'll go through the great season stuff because I had a few things. First of all, I think that the most important thing for his great season is going to be that he helps assimilate a left guard into his position. So, each of them needs to have this symbiotic relationship with the other. And if it's another big man, if it's a Saleh or if it's a Cleveland in particular, Those guys meet the standard of large in most assuredly, and it would be great if he could work with either of them to probably improve their play, make sure they don't fall down in their pass blocking responsibilities, and also that they help him to the degree he can to guard that A gap from becoming targeted time after time by opposing defensive coordinators. I think in terms of the run blocking, I don't need any improvement. I could just say continues to be discussed as one of the best run blockers in the league. I think in terms of pass blocking, he's got to find techniques to help reduce the loss of balance snaps versus larger and longer men. And that's one of the things you really notice on tape about Tyler is that when he loses a pass blocking rep, he's often on one foot up in the air because he's been hit very hard. And those loss of balance snaps, they've got to be reduced. And so whatever it takes to do that, whether it's more hand play, higher level of awareness of where that arm is coming in, an ability to change his angle relative to the arm, whatever it might be, he needs to find some ways. It's not working the way it is. And it's going to be a major point of his development to basically figure out what can work in those cases. Reduced penalties is on my list. And I think it would all be a very a significant development from his rookie season. I still don't think, even if he has a great season, that he necessarily is in Pro Bowl level. There's some great centers in the league. They really stand out from the group in terms of Creed Humphrey and Travis Kelce and whatnot. He might be in a position where in 2 or 3 years he would be on the Pro Bowl discussion. But right now, and he's not a with his current level of pass blocking and where I think I would project his ceiling to be. I don't think he's really a candidate to be all pro. And I hope as a first round draft pick, the Ravens fans are going to let him off the hook on that and say, it's okay if he makes one Pro Bowl in his career. I think that would be pretty terrific. I think it would be indicative of a very fine career where he got by a lot of his physical handicaps.
I think that's reasonable. It's hard to put that as an expectation or as putting that as the bar of success, because you want somebody to succeed and overcome so much more. Mm-hmm. But what he's already done, the talent he already brings to this, that's very admirable. Like you said, he could over the next 4 years add 15 pounds, but you're at what point are you getting diminishing returns in terms of strength versus speed versus power? And he's just doesn't have the physical attributes in terms of length and size, but he's overcome so much already in his performance in play that if he were to have one Pro Bowl, 2 maybe, in a time where like the big name centers are already so entrenched, we're expecting, unless something bad happens to Creed Humphrey, he's just going to get one every year on name recognition plus his play. Not taking anything from him, but name recognition is certainly a part of the aspects of the Pro Bowl, and playing for the Chiefs in a time like this helps, and him being a dominant center also doesn't do so badly either. But it's going to be hard to really make a name for himself, and overall, I think that's a fair case to be made. As badly as I want to argue against it, it's completely reasonable to say.
All right, well, outstanding. So both pretty optimistic, and this is one thing I feel like I'm treated as being a polar outsider in terms of thinking about Tyler Linderbaum. The truth of the matter is, I'm very optimistic about his future. I don't want people to be overly optimistic about who the guy is. The player that I kind of think, even though they're different stages in their career or whatnot, for the Orioles who played was Mark Trumbo. And there's been others, but maybe he's a good recent example of a guy just completely overrated by the Orioles fans, who wasn't a particular good player, even when he hit 47 home runs and led the American League. Projecting positives for the guy was very difficult to do. Well, in one sense, he's like that. In another sense, he's a young player who has a real chance to improve from who he is at this point. It's just, don't get caught up in some of the combined scoring that you'll see from PFF in terms of how good he is already, because I think that's an overstatement of where he is in terms of the game. That's the only caution I would give in that regard.
Yeah, when you see a big name outlet, national outlet like PFF already say, he's so superior to just about everybody, there are enough plays to point to, and you turn on the film, and there are areas of his game that there are still remaining to be developed. I think Hamilton is another case of
Mhm.
that yes, Hamilton had a very good year once he figured out his role and once the Ravens figured out how to operate him and use him best. But there were still certainly areas even down the stretch that he still needed to learn and develop. And you can see that on film, even though he was graded very highly. Number one safety, he's dominant.
Yep.
There's a lot still remaining to develop there. And there was a lot of great. There's a lot of good. There's some bad in there too. And these are young players. They're both really young. And so you'll be able to see that development. But even at their current level, if Linderbaum continue to play that good and improve 4 or 5, up to 9 spots, like I said, if not this year, a couple years down, that's still that's a solid career out of a center that is expected to be a first round pick and has played thus far like one.
Mhm. Agree, and would really happy to see. I think it's one of the really exciting things to see just how much improvement there are. So you mentioned the other thing on the defense. Boy, am I excited to see how the Ravens figure out how they're going to use Kyle Hamilton. I've mentioned this on a couple of these pods, which is one of the nice things about doing this is you kind of let everybody get their chance to talk about various position groups by having this 2-player system. But in the case of Hamilton, I don't think they can afford to let the tail wag the dog and have decisions about decisions about, say, the differentiation in play between, say, Geno Stone at safety and Pepe Williams at slot corner be a deciding factor in where you play Hamilton. The first thing the Ravens have to decide is, where can we get superstar value out of Kyle Hamilton, whether that's at strong safety, slot corner, wherever they might choose to play. Some sort of hybrid role, obviously, either is also possible. But I think, honestly, they're probably going to have him play one position, multiple roles within the position, but one position. So we saw him play slot corner down the stretch. He was very good at it. I think he brings a lot to that position that is different. You put up with some physical limitations, you get other physical outstanding attributes, including that hulking size underneath. And I'm just absolutely fascinated to see how McDonald uses him and develops him into a superstar. It would bother me tremendously if he's a multiple position shift guy like Michael Orr or Kamalai Correa or any of the guys who really got hurt by that. And I think that hopefully they'll find the spot and make him a star.
That's Kamalei Correa is exactly the player that comes to my mind a bit. Brandon Stevens is kind of that guy right now that's dealing with it. That you jumping back him around. You want him at corner. You want him outside. You want him inside. You want to use him as a dime backer. You want to use him up back. As a back end safety now. And now you're going to switch him back. Like that's not. I don't know many areas that is beneficial for a player to develop into a system. And that's me asking for how many guys can do that and just bounce around and be efficient and move things. So overall, like Hamilton, we saw the greatest amount of value at him at slot corner, and that's what I want to see.
Yeah, I'm for that as well, but I don't have to have it. And there have been Ravens who've done very well playing multiple positions over their career. One of the first ones that comes to mind is Rod Woodson. Now, Rod Woodson is a Hall of Famer, and the fact that he could play corner well and then move to safety and be one of the great safeties in the league is not the kind of huge transition. It's a transition that a lot of players end up making. How about a Dallas Thomas? You put that guy anywhere on the football field, and he'd be a great player. And they moved him around from defensive line to defensive end to, in 2005, a Dallas Thomas was part of a defense that played 265 snaps that year. That's approximately one quarter of the season with 3 defensive backs.
Oh my God.
And so Thomas and Scott were the 2 guys who were on the field and basically taking coverage responsibilities as a safety during that year. In fact, there's a great moment. Remember that thing that was done on the Jets game in 2004 that has the Ed Reed interception where you have Herm Edwards on mic'd up that says, no, that's Ed Reed kind of thing,
Yep.
That game, the Ravens had a big spate of cornerback injuries, and they pick up the phone call because they've got Nolan on one of these things where he calls down the sideline and calls up Bart Scott. He put Bart on the phone. He says, I'm going to have you cover 83 on the next drive because we're out of cornerbacks. And basically he's moving Bart Scott to slot corner to cover Quebec. So it was a very cool moment on that. But that defense, it was still Nolan and I'm sorry, it was Ryan in 2005, but it was Nolan in 2004. Really had the ability to make the most out of their players. I just as much as I hated what happened to the Ravens in the secondary in 2005, you got to love the versatility they showed with it.
I mean, yeah, they talk about nothing but versatility now, so that's something to pursue in 2005 greatness in the worst way, but it made it sure exciting and unique.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Broderick Washington, a player entering the year 4 after a fine third season, took a big step forward this last year. Definitely a plus player across the board. You got 2 pretty good players, buddy. I'm thinking about this. A lot of people got somebody good and somebody not so good, but you got 2 pretty good ones. Improved as a pass rusher, I thought. Some good pocket compression, not a lot of finishes himself personally, but one of the things that really shows up in our notes week after week is a involvement in plays by denying space, and that came as a pass rusher and a run defender.
I love Broderick Washington. I think he's a great football player. I know, he's not like this utter sheer dominant guy, but like, I just love watching Broderick Washington play football. I've been kind of like the guy that's, I support, he's a my guy kind of person. All right. And he's always been a good person in the locker rooms, and he's answered the call when questions come abound, and he shows a lot of emotion. And that's something that I enjoy just as a journalist, of course, is having somebody that's willing to talk to reporters after a good or a bad game. And he's willing to do stuff like that, which is very noble. So that's it. But talking about his stuff on the field and the 2022 season, yes, took a big step in just his development and his play and his pass rush, like you said. 17 total pressures at 13 hurries, and the area that we're probably going to talk a lot about in good year, great year is finishing. Like you mentioned, didn't get a whole lot of finishes, only notched 1 sack in the 2022 season, but he was involved in enough that helped others get after the quarterback.
Yeah.
It just wasn't him. So maybe this is the time where the development shows up and he gets get quarterbacks down in future. But overall, liked what he did. He had some good run defense games as well. I thought he played well in those roles, but he played a limited role. Calais Campbell, took the lion's share of snaps at among the defensive line. And those that weren't for him, a lot of the time was Justin Madubuike. He was this 3rd, 4th guy. It would have been, 4th or 5th, even if Michael Pierce had have stayed healthy. And then they rotated in Brent Urban, I believe, throughout the course of the season. So I think the big thing is where are all those snaps from Calais Campbell going?
Yes.
And I think Broderick Washington is going to be the guy because, Campbell had big snap games. He had snaps, where it was, I believe he nearly had 60 snaps against the Patriots. I don't think he had a game under 28 snaps, and that's incredible.
You've hit on exactly the biggest question about the defensive line. Exactly. I wonder if we could defer that till we talk about Broderick Washington a little bit, because I think there's some very interesting points about all the linemen that kind of go with how do they fill those enormous shoes. And there's another guy, in my opinion, whose snaps should be reduced. So we'll talk about that as we go through this. But in terms of the role that Washington had this last year, he had really a 1st and 2nd down role. And I'll give it to you here. He had 487 non-penalty snaps. And this is how I account for them. So if there's an accepted penalty on the play, it didn't count. But he had 239 first down snaps, 176 second down snaps. So right there, that's 415 of his 487. Only 58 on 3rd down and 14 on 4th down, which are going to be mostly short yardage. The point out of that is that there isn't a lot of opportunity to get off the pass, get after the passer in an unrestrained way. So if it's 1st or 2nd down, typically maintaining rush lanes is going to be important. It's going to be important for you to be contributory, but you can't give up on the play you can't give up on the possibility of it being a run play right away in terms of what you're doing. So that naturally slows down pass rush. And that's why situational pass rushers can have so much more impact when they're in there situationally on third down when it's or in points of the game where the other team is definitely going to pass. He's just not that guy. He's not the guy that will be on. You have to sacrifice defensive linemen for starters at that point. 2 is the most you have on the field. The Ravens typically, with the kick-in guys they've had, have been more typically playing 3 outside linebackers and 2 linemen in such situations. And so Washington has a very limited number of chances. You mentioned Calais Campbell was a guy who got most of those opportunities. When I look at his pass rush numbers and I see a not terribly impressive overall pressure rate, I still say that's still a guy who I saw him contribute to the pass rush in a way that I thought was really positive.
Yeah, that's where I really come away with it is he didn't have pristine opportunity to go after quarterbacks unabound. Like you said, a lot of overwhelming amounts of first and second down snaps. So he never really got this wonderful, hey, it's 3rd and 13. You go after him. It's, hey, we need you off the field. We got to get our guys in for 3rd.
Right. That's exactly it.
and he's like, man, that's the fun part, I bet. That's why I want to be in for this. But it makes sense. So, and will those snaps go to him? That's to be determined in a very curious part of what we will see for the 2023 season. That's something that a lot of people will be focusing in on. That's something to watch all through training camps and hear about through training camps. Is he in there on the 3rd down rotation, or who is in on 3rd down rotation? Preseason, you'll start to pay attention to that depending upon how many starters or guys they keep on and off the field throughout preseasons. Now they're very, a lot of teams are risk averse in preseason as that thing starts to shift off. And then the first quarter of the season, and see if the changes happen throughout the course. That's going to be a very exciting part of it. But he maintained rush lanes well. He was a disciplined pass rusher. He was a disciplined, disciplined run defender. I like the way that he operated, and he showed that he has more. I really feel he demonstrated he can take on a bigger role, and he has developed far past being a 5th round guy for the Ravens and into a role that is admirable at the NFL level.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we have not mentioned yet about his pass rush ability was he batted 6 passes. I think that led the team, but that's a really good total for one season for an NFL defensive lineman. And it takes a lot of awareness to know exactly when to shoot your hands up. And even taller players like Brent Urban, who basically, one of the things he told me on the show was, if I get my hand up, there's not going to be a quarterback who can generally throw over me. But he said a lot of quarterbacks, and I got a sense the timing was a part of this. When he had his hand up a little bit early, were able to throw to either side of his arm. Oftentimes between his head and his arm was an open area. And Washington, the way I have seen it, is more quick about getting up and timing his leap more effectively to get those batted passes. And so that's been something that really he's been very good at. And I think it was one of the really nice steps forward in this last year. If I had to pick one thing, that might have been it.
Yeah, he did lead the team with 6. Mm-hmm. The next was Jason Pierre-Paul with 4, and then Matabike had 3, tied with Brent Urban, as you were mentioning. So I found that to be rather curious.
Okay, that's good. I wasn't 100% sure of that, but it was my recollection as going through the season. I want to talk about his run defense a little bit here. He had 26 defensive wins. He contributed among 49 tackles. So some of those were on passes, some were on runs, but a defensive win is describing as not keeping up with the sticks effectively on first down. You need to get at least 45% of the total yards you need. So if it's 1st and 10, you need to get 5 yards. If it's 1st and 20, you need to get 9. So on second down, you have to get 60%. On third down, you have to get 100% of the yards. Any tackles that are short of that are defensive wins. So anyway, 26 defensive wins is quite good. The other thing that's outstanding is a very low missed tackle rate. Now, defensive linemen tend to have lower missed tackle rates, but his was only 7%, and that's really exceptional. So he's has those kind of arms. He can extend them, get on a player, and not give up that grip is extremely valuable.
Yeah, you talk about the win rate is what you're mentioning. PFF has their stops.
Rate.
Yeah, and he had 25, so that's rather impressive. And he is a guy that when he gets his paws on you, it's over for just about anybody in the NFL, and that was apparent throughout the course of the season. And I was a little interested in that because he has varying, fluctuating tackle grades from PFF that I was curious about. He has like 2 grades they're like 30,
Okay.
and then the rest of them are all average.
Let's take a moment, because it's all about interpreting that. Those tackle
Yeah.
grades jump all over the place, but you notice for most of the season they're very consistent. Basically, that's all the games where he had no missed tackles, with one exception. He has 1 missed tackle in Week 8 against Tampa. I think what they did is that's a missed tackle with a 0 grade applied to that play. They have a +2 to -2 that underlies every grade. In Week 2 and 3 is when he accumulated all his missed tackles for the season. So you get 2 against Miami, 1 against New England, and his grades on those probably netted out to about -1.5 each week, or maybe -2 for that. So that's why that happens. So if you don't have missed tackles, you generally get a good score that looks green on the PFF chart. And that's the reason for it. And it's very difficult to tell, by the way, how good a player is during the season, because an individual game can contribute a lot of missed tackles to season stats. And so you'll often see a guy who has a couple of red games and then he's red for the year, or he's a 40 or something for the year, despite what it seems like, wait a minute, all these greens are there. Well, that's the reason.
That makes a lot more sense.
They did a much better job of presenting the information when they gave you all the +2 and -2s. And I've talked to them about that in terms of like bringing that back. They didn't want to get into that. They thought that they should be selling that for more, was the idea. So they give that to the teams, obviously the individual grades by play. That's one of the things they're selling to the NFL teams, but they didn't want to give it to the general public in a very general subscription, which is why they basically created these least common denominator packages that have this 1 to 100 scale in it. I hate it, but to buy the increased package was like $1,500. So I hated that worse.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about what we have here. Played 43% of the snaps here. I thought one of the really good things, and I'm going to relate this to another Ravens linebacker, is that I don't think he wore down over the course of the season. His play is fairly consistent in terms of playing well from start to finish. And the guy who did wear down a little bit, and I think he needs to take less snaps this year for it, is Justin Madubuike. And it's not really unexpected, I think, and I'm going to go to get Madubuike's percentage of snaps for the year here. But Madubuike played over 59% of the snaps. First of all, that's a lot more. And it led all Ravens defensive linemen. Campbell played 51%. To me, to my way of thinking, and as just watching the games, Madubuike is on the field much too often on early downs. And that's where the Ravens need guys like Travis Jones, Michael Pierce, and Broderick Washington to eat up those snaps and reduce Madubuike's workload as much as possible on those early down, first half in particular, drives. And it doesn't mean he can never be on the field in those situations. It's okay if once in a while, every third series he's in there. Probably does not need to start the game, other than he wants to start on his resume, on his permanent record.
Yeah.
But honestly, Madubuike, to be a more effective pass rusher, I think he's going to need to take reduced run snaps.
I think that's an excellent point, because that's a guy that, is heralded for being the pass rush interior defensive lineman that the Ravens really want. And they're desiring more than ever now with, Calais Campbell elsewhere in Atlanta. So they're going to need somebody that can get after quarterbacks. That's a fast interior defensive lineman, not just the juggernaut size speed combo of Michael Pierce, but somebody that is able to explode through and make an instant impact. And Madubuike has for all purposes, should be that guy.
Yeah. So I think that's the way it's going to turn out this year, but let's just discuss that for a minute. If the Ravens have their traditional kind of a 4-man front, and you can always bring extra guys up the line of scrimmage. Not talking about that. I'm talking about the 4 guys who are down at the line of scrimmage, typically on a passing down. In 2019, they would have done it with 4 outside linebackers at times, what I would call the race car package. Other people might call NASCAR or other things. In the years since Campbell arrived, Campbell's generally been on the field with 3 or even 4 other outside linebackers, one of whom was left standing. But they would often do 3 with a kick-in guy. This year, I think that role is wide open. I think there are 3 players legitimately who could be in there on passing downs. Matabike would be my number one choice as the one guy, but they might need 2 if they don't have outside linebacker health holding up, for instance, like they had problems last year. And then I think that it's possible the other guy I really expect to have a pretty big role is Travis Jones this year. Could be a guy who's on the field on passing downs. Not even impossible that Michael Pierce would be out there. How would you really see that, breaking out?
I'm a guy that, I want Travis Jones to succeed, and he's going to have to take a bigger leap to be able to be that guy. And I'm impatient in my thought process, and I think Michael Pierce should be the number 2 guy personally. For all the appreciation I have for Washington and the excitement that there is over Jones, Michael Pierce is an adept pass rusher. Mm-hmm. That's how he's made money in the NFL. Is through his pass rush numbers and his ability. I mean, he was graded as one of the best pass rushers among interior defensive linemen before he suffered the injury. And then it was really awkward because halfway through the year, you kept having to, organize by snaps to get him out of there because he hasn't played in 4 or 5 weeks. And he was still one of the highest graded pass rushers when I was looking things over because he was just so dominant in his few snaps. I think he's really good pass rusher. And I think it would, for me, be even possibly Pierce Matabike, but I want Matabike to be number 1 because he needs to get to that role for Matabike. That needs to be him on third down. That's the guy that should be stepping up the most. He's the young guy. He can be the most impactful if he can set up. He looks ready for the year. I don't know if you saw the recent photo of him. He's absolutely shredded, carved of granite.
More than he was before because he's
it's
rock.
insane. No, I saw it. Yeah, no, it's on. I tweeted out from the Baltimore Beatdown account. He just carved of granite, and he looks primed for that season, just like he looked last year. But like you said, he had too much on his plate last year, and he wore down. And that's a really good point. But overall, I have it as Matabike, Pierce. I want it to be Broderick Washington just because I have an affinity for him, but Travis Jones probably should be that guy too. And I think those 2 will contest for it throughout. And that's an area I bet we see rotation from those last 2 guys because the Ravens want to see who's going to step up. They very much love to do stuff like that. It feels like.
Right. It's certainly a possibility. And I think Ajabo and Owe are so important to this defense. Both are rush side linebackers. I think you don't have to. You can put 2 rush guys in on third down if you want to, but I think you signal something to the offense in doing that. And I think the Ravens have done very well in keeping a player like Bowser on the field who can drop, he can rush, he can loop towards the center of the line. He can drop off the line and pick his gap. I think they've gotten a lot of value out of him. One of the real questions for the Ravens this year is how are they going to get through all the snaps with their current dearth of guys who can truly play Sam linebacker, who can drop it all to cover and can play on that side. John Harbaugh had kind of a careless comment about it last year, saying that these guys are all outside linebackers. They can play that if needed. And honestly, it kind of ruined Owe's second year in the league, really set him back to have to do the things he had to do on that Sam side while Bowser was hurt early on. And then he moved back to the other side. And honestly, from a pressure perspective, not necessarily from a finishing perspective, from a pressure perspective, I thought he had a pretty damn good year after he got rid of those the Sam responsibilities and the need to be on the field for so many damn snaps because the Ravens just couldn't keep 2 outside linebackers standing for much of the early season.
Yeah, I'm a guy that'll go to bat for Odafe Owe. I was there all last season, and I saw him be one of the final guys off the field or the last guy off the field every practice, every training camp. That guy works so hard, and Ravens fans want him to immediately be this 12-sack guy when he didn't get the opportunity to do that because of the responsibilities and because of the snap counts that he had. And like you said, the outside linebacker health last year was absolutely crazy to begin the year. They brought in Justin Houston. He had 60 snaps game one, or was it Jason Pierre-Paul? Excuse me.
Yeah.
They brought in JPP, and all of a sudden he's got a 55 snap game, on a short week. It was crazy. Just the level of difficulty that, a young linebacker like that had was a little ultimately too challenging. And like you said, when he got back into his normal role, and from a pressure perspective, he was so close on so many. And I talked to him about that. And we all asked him during this year's training camp on just what that meant to him and how he learned from it and how he felt about it. And, he was like, I watched the film and I said, damn, just frustrated that he was so close. And that's something that I think one of the best hires for the Ravens this offseason was outside linebackers coach Chuck Smith.
Yep.
Because if you can get an extra half second for Owe, that difference is monumental. A half second in the NFL is everything. A half step is everything. And that's what it felt like it was for Owe he was probably a half step from a 5-10 sack season. It truly felt that way. Maybe I'm exacerbating it a little bit, but I remember watching and tweeting just about every game with Owe. Owe was almost there. Owe was so close. Oh, man, Owe almost had him. He just barely missed it. That was something that was so frequent, and this is a season that Owe could no longer have to have that title to him.
Position coaches are pure gold when they're good. And, the Ravens, obviously, with Dallas, as we mentioned earlier in this show, have really benefited. I don't even know if Dallas Sanders is a scheme guy. I don't even know if he, draws up Roman's offense on a board and can tell you exactly how it works and whatnot. He probably can. But I tell you, where we observe him is at practice with painstaking footwork and hand placement, drilling. And it's really old school. We've talked about this before on the show, I know, but it bears repeating. It's just he will sit there and go in and take the place of the lineman and then actually make the steps, kind of put his hands out there. And sometimes, you hear him talk about things. And I remember Orlando Brown challenging him once. And he said, the thing had to do with hand placement of a certain type. And how it came out of Dallas Sanders' mouth is, when Orlando Brown says, "Well, what did I do wrong in that rep?" He goes, "You're slapping at him. You're slapping at him." Like that. It was one of these things that it was part of the spiel he'd given, but there were a lot of words spoken. Obviously, he's an outstanding technical offensive line coach, and the litany of players that the Ravens have developed over the past decade or so really speaks to his contributions.
And if they can find another kind of skill coach in Chuck Smith to develop these young outside linebackers, that'll really put it together for them and for the defensive linemen. He's going to be working with them in some capacity, working on their pass rush moves. That's what he talks about so much, is everybody needs to have a pass rush move. They need to have something that they can go in their bag and take that weapon out and swing on it, club on it, rip on it, swim, bull rush, whatever it so is. And be effective with it. And that's what we're going to hopefully see out of every single pass rusher, which is probably going to include Broderick Washington in some capacity.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And first of all, whoever he can teach to do something better, it's always a positive thing. I want to go back to Odafe Owe for a minute, even though we're not talking about Owe on this show, or he's not the focus of this. Owe, the problem with me to him is get off. And honestly, he does not put the fear of his athleticism into the opponent. I've always been thinking there's got to be a way to train on this. There's got to be a machine that could improve his get off by making him do hundreds, if not probably hundreds would do it, of reps against the machine to improve that get off. And if he could start with that and then get Chuck Smith helping him with the counter move, what I've said since he joined the league is there is no tackle he will ever face who is the athlete he is. So everyone across the line, every left tackle should basically have a shaky kind of look to them as they're lining up opposite Odafe Owe, even in a true patch set.
Yeah,
go ahead.
He's just a true weapon, and he's so big, so fast. The athleticism is, as you said, off the charts. And another knock, the knock that you have is his get off. And I agree. The bigger one that I had is he didn't have moves. It didn't feel like he had real moves to attack with and be on the offensive. And that doesn't threaten your opposition, which is what you're saying is he never was able to put them on a back foot mentally or literally to attack.
Yeah, I think he may have those. It's just they're not effective, and we haven't really seen a whole lot. He's stunted a little bit and been very quick, much too quick for defenses, and so we've seen some of that. But he needs a 2-stage move to get home: a spin move, a Euro step, some sort of dipsy do, cross chop, whatever. I mean, cross chop is really a 1-step move. I'm looking for a 2-step. I'm going this way and then I'm going that way move. Something that a pass rush plan. They would talk about. Euro step and spin move are two that would fit him perfectly in terms of beating a guy to the inside after showing an outside move. And there ain't any left tackle who could take a first move from a triggered up Odafe Owe, who's quick off the line of scrimmage, and not overreact to it, because he's just too great an athlete for them not to overreact to his initial move that they see him making. I think when that comes together for him, he's going to be an unbelievable pass rusher in this league.
That's something that we were talking to Chuck Smith also throughout training camp and OTAs and mini camp, not training camp yet. And he talked so much about all these great pass rushers and their signature pass rush move, and he kept talking about the spin, and whether or not he's hinting at something or foreshadowing or not, I certainly hope it is, because a spin move from Odafe Owe with his length and strength and speed is a nightmare. He talked about Max Crosby's spin move and Dwight Freeney's spin move, and Von Miller's got one too, that he can do. And if you can get Owe, who's just a true athlete, we keep using that word because I don't know many, few that can embody that term more than Owe. And you can get him to explode through, and triggered up is brilliantly worded. That's a guy that's lethal on a football field.
All right, outstanding. I mean, I love the excitement level whenever you're on the show. Really appreciate having you on here. Obviously, I want to talk a little bit before we get back to some of the how snaps will be divided thing about what's happening in 24 and beyond. Because right now, the Ravens only have Travis Jones signed on the defensive line. I was actually mighty surprised that the Ravens didn't try and sign one of Matabike or Washington, who are entering year 4, to an early deal. And by the way, this is a situation where the Ravens' dollars to spend are obviously limited. But one of those two, I would think, would be eager to take a risk-reducing, which means also somewhat team-friendly deal that would be priced at a level, that basically has a divisible benefit on the table. Risk is out, but you also get paid now, kind of thing. Chuck Clark did it. Patrick Ricard did it. Other Ravens who've been good have done it. Those two guys are at different levels, which honestly makes the job a little easier, because you might say, I'd rather have Broderick Washington at $4.5 million for 3 years, or maybe I'd rather have Matabike at $7.5 million for 3 years, or maybe it's even a little higher than that to tack on to the end of this season. But I'm really surprised the Ravens have not made a progress in that way, because it's basically putting them in a position of having to rebuild that defensive line again.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think had the Ravens probably approached one and or both of them, I would assume they've had some introductory talks. I'm willing to venture that both of those players see the absence of snaps and the availability that we're going to get to, and they're going to see that as their prime opportunity to every sack is just how much more money, in the grand scope of the NFL. All of a sudden you get 4 sacks in a season, and it feels like your contract goes up by, $500K with each one, or $250K with each one annually on a deal. And instead going in with Washington being like, hey, yeah, I played really well. You guys saw my run numbers. You saw my grades. I was a good pass rusher. I contributed. And like, well, you only had 1 sack, and I know, and this is devaluing the conversation, a bit, but, to a semantics, but overall, if he can approach and be like, see, when you put me in that bigger role after Calais is gone and somebody needed to fill those snaps and I stepped up, and I had 4.5 this year because I was finally able to get to the ones that, I got to the third down snaps. You had to give somebody, and I got them, and I showed you I can do something with them. My pressures are now up. Instead of 13 hurries, I had 24. So much opportunity lies ahead for both of those guys, and I would be willing to bet that is why we haven't seen a deal, because Broderick, a fifth round guy, wants to get paid good money, and maximizing it, I don't blame. Yes, the risk averse nature, like you said, of signing early, yeah, you might not get as much, but it's still millions of dollars, and you've been on a rookie deal that doesn't pay you all too much if you're either guy. They weren't first rounders. So overall, I think just the opportunity that lies ahead for both of them is possibly why we haven't seen a deal out of either yet.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong about that, by the way, and I think you stated it very well. With the opportunity there, that they may be getting advice to basically, this is not the time to take less. This is the time to try and maximize what you're going to get out of this. It wouldn't surprise me if those discussions have happened with their people, and in terms of what's going on. So it does make a lot of sense. I really love the way the Ravens attack divisible benefit contracts like this. And I think that there are lots of reasons to really try and go after them. I don't know if they got distracted by the obvious need to deal with Lamar, deal with some of these horrible void year contracts they've got now, which are basically eliminate 2024 money without producing any 2024 player value. And they've said, no, I don't know if we can really even get one more 1/3 or 1/2 a cornerstone contract additionally to give one of these guys. It's a tough situation probably for both sides to figure out how to do this. And the Ravens do always think in terms of comp picks as well. And these guys probably will end up each providing one if they both end up walking at the end of this year. So not an ideal situation, but definitely a possibility.
I feel like they're going to hang on to the guy that doesn't outperform a number. If Matabike gets 7.5 sacks, and start going on a pressure tear, he's gone. There's just, you can't afford that. No chance about it. But if Broderick goes in, gets 3.5, maybe 4.5, that's affordability. In that, or if God forbid one of them goes down with injury, suddenly it's a very neutral deal as well in that opportunity.
That's the cautionary tale right there, is when somebody goes down with injury. And there's a defensive lineman right now in that same room who basically went through the injury at the most inopportune time. That's Brent Urban. And he ended up losing a fair amount of career earnings because of the timing of that injury. He's very level-headed about it in terms of my discussions with him, but he was in position where he could have gotten 4 years, $26 million or something out of his contract, and then it just didn't. It obviously didn't work out with the injury. Came back to the Ravens, but when the team is offering to take some of that risk off the table, as they did with Clark and Ricard, and get a deal done of that type, there is usually merit to it, and I hope there's representation there for both those guys that would be able to look at that and say, you know what, you need to balance A and B. Do you like living in Baltimore? Do you like playing with this coaching staff? Do you like this? I mean, weigh all those factors, make yourself a pros and cons list, and try and figure out if you should take a little bit less money than you think you're worth to take this risk off the table.
No doubt about it. There's certainly wins and losses on both cases, and there's countless guys you can point to that have won and lost on both sides of those things.
Yeah, absolutely true. Okay, so let's say Joe Flacco, certainly one pick. Let's talk about the filling in for the Campbell loss, because it is really the biggest question on this defensive line. And last year, and I should have this. I do. I just got to get to it here. Give me a second. So the Ravens had been a team that typically played slightly less than 2 defensive linemen per play. So if you think about it, when they play nickel, they've got 2 exactly on the field. So that's kind of a neutral play, if you want to call it. But when they're in pass rushing downs, they'll often play 1 or even 0 at sometimes in the past. And if they're in base package, they play 3. So usually those are the choices: 1, 2, or 3. Sometimes you'll play 4 because you're in a 4th and 1 or a 3rd and 1 kind of situation. But last year the Ravens played 2.22 defensive linemen per play. That's a high total, and I actually expect that to come down. And if you think about it, that's the sum of the percentage of snaps that each of the linemen played. Gets you to 222%. So if you're going to figure out how that gets divided, the first thing I'd say is I'd expect, because the Ravens have their outside linebackers healthy now, and knock on wood, they have them starting the season and throughout the season, they hopefully can reduce that number to 210% or 205% to reflect the inclusion of outside linebackers on those passing downs, those obvious passing downs. But that's still, to my mind, that's an average of 42% spread across 5 guys. That's a hard number to get to. Very hard number to get to with this group.
Yeah, that's a lot of snaps, but I think the Ravens are desperately wanting to get Ajabo and Owe on the field, and Bowser. They love when they can use him as that versatile linebacker that he's heralded as, the guy that can do things. And no, I don't think he can get all 3 on the field, consistently, of course. But I think just having 2 young outside linebackers that they're able to give so many more snaps to is going to be an opportunity. But that's so many snaps to try and cover and get across. I don't think that's going to be really challenging to do so. Unless they're doing their jobs in pass rush situations and getting 3, maybe 4 guys there. I don't know.
It definitely be a challenge to get it done. Brent Urban may have to play a few more run snaps, but the package that I think could get some snap eating done, I don't know how much they're going to be willing to do this, but I really want to see an uptick in Travis Jones snaps. And he's a natural nose tackle, but he's also a very, very natural 3 tech. And so the Ravens have 2 needs they need to fulfill. They need to get Travis Jones on the field more, and they need to in my mind, get Justin Madubuike off the field more. The natural way to do that is to play the 1-3 of Pierce and Jones, where Jones gets to play opposite a guard. Jones is a devastating one-on-one player. If you look at where he had problems this last year, getting stood up by 2 offensive linemen is something. First of all, it happens all the time to everybody, not just rookies, but he's vulnerable to that. I'll say, put him one-on-one against virtually any guard in this league, and he's a brutal force. And that's what we really saw at UConn, was his ability to do that effectively was what made him a higher round NFL draft pick. I really hope that they'll do that again this year and really try and see what he can provide at that place. Pierce is a fine nose tackle who, when Brandon Williams and he were on the field together, it was Brandon Williams at the 3 and Pierce at the nose. That's a devastating group as well. Would love to replicate that, in terms of a run defense that the Ravens would present on early downs this year.
Yeah, you gotta include Travis Jones, and that was something that I actually had down, was that Travis Jones is a guy that needs to make a leap that'll benefit just for the total snaps. I wrote most things about Broderick, but that is an area that if we're gonna divide, like if you have to divide these snaps up, Madubuike's got to be cut down on his. And you've got to be able to replace that with a guy that you drafted last year that was supposed to do so good and be on the field more and dominate. And you saw it in small bursts, which is okay from a rookie. He's a 3rd rounder, so it took a little bit. It took a little bit too much time, I think, just for year 1 to like really settle in on. But that's an area that if you can get him one-on-one, like you said, with just a guard instead of, and having a healthy Michael Pierce will do so much good stuff for this entire defensive line in terms of assignments that offensive linemen will have to carry out. That's the best way to go about it.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to it and hoping that's certainly something the Ravens go to. Let's move on and go ahead and talk about what is a good year and a great year for Broderick Washington here.
Yeah, good year, I'd say, is actually not just continuing. I think he does need to elevate himself a bit more in regards with run defense. Continue the tackling rate as you mentioned. If you can keep at that 7% level and minimize missed tackles, that's I think a good year in itself. And I would like to see better pressure numbers. Overall, his snaps needs to be increased. It doesn't need to be this massive amount, but snaps overall. I'm a little bit erratic. Apologies. Snap numbers need to be able to shoulder a greater load, both in run defense, but also I would like to see him on the field on third down, some situational stuff. Third and shorts, I think, are still an area that they're going to want him on the pitch for, because that's not a guaranteed passing down, but it's still an opportunity for him to do a little bit more damage and be included on more.
Okay, I think based on what I heard there, I think I'm setting the bar a little lower for him for a good season. First of all, I thought his season was just outstanding, a huge leap.
Mm-hmm.
There may be a consolidation required this year, but
Yeah,
I hear a couple things. I want him to have a pro rata increase in snaps. Why am I saying that? I think the Ravens will play more defensive snaps this year because of the way they're going to play offense. They're going to play a faster, looser offense. The Roman offense chewed up the clock, reduced the number of total drives. And now you're basically, you're going to take more drives yourself. You're going to get more opportunities for big plays and scores and whatnot, but you're also going to give more to your opponents. And that's going to put a burden on the defense that it is going to be in the form of an increased snap count. So I think if you could just continue at 43% and take an increased snap burden because of that, which might be as much as 10 or 12% that would accrue just from the increase in snaps overall defensively, I think that would be terrific. I think he already is pretty much a plus run defender. If he continues where he is there, that's fantastic. And I think it's still a good season if he continues what he did as a pass rusher, including the batted passes. So he's got contributions coming in the form of both the pressure that lead to a lot of second man sacks, but also in terms of those batted passes and the opportunities those create. I don't think any of those were turned into interceptions this last year, but those are coming. If there are 6 per year, there's going to be some interceptions that accrue from that.
I think one of them was, I think it was the one that Jason Pierre-Paul intercepted.
That was Urban.
Oh, it was Urban?
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was Broderick.
Let me make sure. I'll go back and make sure, but we'll look after the show.
I thought I asked him about it because I saw him at Calais Campbell's Thanksgiving drive, and I was like, "Did you?" I think I asked him that. I'm trying to replay it because I was walking out to the parking lot with him after the event, and I asked him, I was like, "Did you bat that thing intentionally towards him?" He's like, "I was like swinging, I kind of saw him, but I was just kind of." I think that was Washington.
I'm looking it up right now.
If not, he hustled me, and good for him. Yeah, please look it up on that because I felt like that was a nice Brody swat, but it could have been Urban. I mean, Urban had 3, I believe.
Broderick Washington had 2 passes defensed in that game, and Urban had none. So I think you're correct. Oh man, he would have hustled you, boy, if that was true.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to find the actual play now here. Okay, I think you're right for sure, but that's great, and that cool. That corrects a thought I had, so that's good news.
I wasn't sure if I had implanted a memory on my own self. I was like, I thought I asked him about that. Maybe I didn't, and I thought I did, but okay, yeah. Good deal on that.
All right. No, it's certainly a big part of what he contributes. So. My good season anyway. Kind of a lower bar because I think he was so good in terms of his work this last year. So 43% season again, which will mean instead of approximately 500 snaps, it well could mean 545 to 560 snaps would be exceptionally good.
I think that's reasonable enough. Maybe I have a little bit higher of expectations on Washington. Like you said, I put a little bit higher of a bar, and I think that's probably because I think I have a bit of a rooting interest, to be quite honest, on this guy. And I didn't also take into the account of just how much he developed last season, as you did. And that's a respect to you, not me. That's me maybe forgetting that, he's already gone so far, and maybe another incredible leap is a little outlandish.
Hold on, I'm looking at this Tampa Bay game. There was no interception by Jason Pierre-Paul in this game. So wasn't it New
Ooh.
Orleans that game that happened in? We're checking this. You just are going to wait on and listen to us check this out, because that's what I really remember this being Brett Irvin. So we're going to go back to this.
Okay.
Here.
I could tell a Broderick Washington story while you look it up.
Yes,
So
please do.
yeah, after the Steelers game where the Ravens lost, and I think it was Najee Harris ran for over 100 yards, and the run game was really the weak point of the Ravens defense, and because of that they lost, and I walked into, that was the first loss at the stadium that I saw too. After getting my credentials, and go inside, and we're walking around the locker room, and everybody's getting dressed, or half of them are already gone. And Washington, as sitting in his locker, still in pads. It's been 35 minutes after the game, staring 1,000-yard stare directly into the wall. And this is my first year of like doing in-game coverage and getting credentials for attending games and being at the stadium. Beforehand, I was getting a credential to everything except game day, which was how things were operating. But got game day credentials, and so I'd never approached somebody post game as the first guy. I'd always like follow in and filter in as a younger reporter in that. And this was the first time, and I was like, he's still staring at the wall. 35 minutes go by, 40 minutes go by. I wrote about this. It's on my game coverage of that game. And then Kevin Zeitler's the first one to step up. He's the veteran guy. He answers, the media's got questions. He's got to answer it. And they talk about the loss and the frustration and what it meant. And Broderick's staring off. And I walk over. Excuse me. I walked over to Broderick before Zeitler. I walked over and I'm like, Hey, Broderick, are you willing to talk? And he looks up, finally snaps at him, and he's like, I'm going to need a minute, man. All right.
That's great.
Yeah. And I'm like, all right, I understand. He's like, I'll talk to you. Just, I can't yet. And I was like, all right. And so then we talked to Zeitler, and we finish up with Zeitler, and I turn over and I look, and he just like gives me this nod, like
he's ready.
All right. Like, let's rip this Band-Aid off. And so we go over there, and this is my first time like being the guy to say like, hey, can we speak to you? So I got questions first. Like reporters, like, you're the one that had the bravery to talk to him, so you go off. And so I asked my first question. I was like, Broderick, we can see the emotions on your face right now. What's going through your mind? He's like, I'm pissed. I'm just, this is all on. And like, he's expressing himself, and Calais is one locker over, and all 6'8" of Calais' frame is standing up and waving his hands down, like, calm yourself. You got to settle down. And Broderick goes from being like ready to just be very illustrious in his frustrations and how hard he's taking this loss. And it kind of cools it off, but he let us see the simmer. It didn't overboil. And that was something that I will forever like be respectful and appreciative of, because, win or loss, good or bad, like any commentary is good. When you say nothing, when you're just like, yeah, it was a football game, I like what we did out there. It's nothing for substance for what we would like to write about. If you're angry at us, that's fine. At least you are angry. At least you have a response. And he was willing to share that. And he was almost my media good guy for my vote last year, just because of how wonderful he was in the few media appearances we got him. He's a wonderful guy.
I will say I'm particularly frustrated by coach speak. And one of the things I like to do is ask an actual football question. Actual football questions are not always welcome. If you want to ask about, we saw the dime defense very effective in this game. Can you talk about that a little bit? They won't necessarily want to talk about that. Yeah. If you're at camp, or you look at the transcripts online, or you watch the actual interviews, you'll see what are a fair number of highly general questions where reporters seem to be looking for some catchphrase they can latch on to. I remember when they talked about Chuck Clark and the green dot, they talked about him being bold, brief, and something else, but it was alliteration was being used. Yeah. And that's enough of a signal to know that Harbaugh is not just using coach speak in this. He really believes this, and that's something. If he talks about, he's helped us, he's been on the field, he's done this, I mean, you just know you're getting crap. If you're talking about injuries anytime, he's talking about that. I think somebody could really sit down and do between the lines, and it's like analyzing the interviews for what's not being said. And I think it'd be a great
Yeah.
thing to do. And there are a lot of people who are skilled at that, but in some ways it takes an analyst to do it because you know what's crap and what's not when he's talking about the actual play on the field. In some
Yeah.
ways, you want to have a person really skilled in tells, like a poker player or something, who
Yeah.
might be good at picking up on little things he didn't really be like. I touched his face high up. Now you know what that means. That's a lie.
Yeah. Oh,
So
that'd be great. Oh, that'd be fantastic. Oh, yes.
I don't think it'd be entirely welcome, but it would be an interesting kind of a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. That's something I'd be like, I definitely know when things are being said that are being said, or when they are not being said from commentary.
Yep.
Like, there's been comments I'm like, oh, like walking back from a media, event, and I'm like, he said that without saying it, and
Yep.
and other people are like, yeah, and I'm like, I'd love to say that, but like, I don't want to lose a credential because I'm like, oh,
Uh-huh.
this was a shot at blank about blank. Like, that's just dangerous territory to get in. So you have to be connected without being connected, or you have to just do it purely from a video standpoint.
Yeah, it's a very interesting tightrope you're trying to balance there, obviously,
Oh
and
yeah.
there are additional freedoms that come with just being a writer analyst. That said, that access is really nice to have.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what a great season would be for Broderick Washington.
More pass rush snaps. Maybe that's better for him, but more opportunity. You got to replace Calais Campbell and nearly 400 pass rush snaps. That's going to be spread about with all of these guys, but Washington's going to be one of them. I think sack numbers going up, or just total pressures. Not necessarily. I'd like to see him finish more. 3.5 sacks to 4.5, I think would be a great year for him, because he's going to be lower on this unit, just by way of getting Pierce back, wanting to get more snaps out of Jones, wanting to more specialize Matabike for the pass rush role as a defensive lineman. And now with a full array of outside linebackers, you're not just contesting pass rush snaps with the respective defensive linemen. You also have to do so with a full array of linebackers that are Ravens are going to want to mix and match and get on the field. And also they love to include, Patrick Queen in on blitzing opportunities. So they want to have him as pass rushers, and they like to be versatile in that regard. So overall, I think if he could just finish the ones that he does have the opportunities at, with more effectiveness, 3.5 sacks, I'd be 3.5 to 4.5, I think would be great. His run defense, like you said, is already rather strong, and continuing in that, maybe even bolstering what he had. I've lowered mine a little bit just because of how much you pointed out, just how much he's developed, and maybe not putting the bar too exceptionally high. Is kind of where I see him as having a better year.
All right, I had a little bit of difference here. I think if a good season is at 43% of snaps, I'm going to put a great season is he's pushing his way to be on the field and he gets to 50%. I think the way that happens is in some of the ways you're talking about, by getting those marginal snaps will have to be largely higher probability of passing down snaps that should give him some ability to get involved there. And I want to see if he's on those field for those snaps. Part of what I want to see in a great season is a higher level of pass rush contribution. I don't think he can get more tipped passes. In fact, I think he's going to lose ground there. So because he's obviously coming from a very high level, but want him to get more pressures that lead to second man opportunities. So get the first pressure fairly quickly to compress the pocket, make the quarterback bring the ball down, and all of a sudden one of the outside linebackers or Patrick Queen is there, and the thing is finished. The Ravens thrive off this second man pressure. They've done very well with it. And it's an area where I think that Washington has the potential to contribute greatly to it. So I don't think he really has to be the finisher in my own way. He's the finisher when he tips a pass, and he can be the finisher when he gets a quarterback hit or a sack. But I'm not going to put some sort of arbitrary limit and say that he needs to get to X or Y in those cases. I just want to see more aggregate pass rush contribution.
I think that's reasonable enough. Yeah.
All right, outstanding, Kyle. Just great talking football with you. We've let this go really long. These episodes. I was trying to keep about 50 minutes, but whenever you and I talk football, there's always a great set of tangential side stories, and I love hearing this. Is why I like doing shows with you as often as we're able to. But anyway, I really appreciate you coming on. Tell folks where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, if that's still around in a month, at Kyle P. Barber. I don't know what's going on. There's now Threads. Now there's now Blue Sky. We'll see what happens with all this. But if Twitter's still alive in a month, that's where you'll find me. You can find my work and the work of my wonderful staffs over at BaltimoreBeatdown.com. And then I also do some freelance work for BaltimoreRavens.com under their Late for Work section. I publish every Monday edition of Late for Work, so you can check that out as well.
All right, very cool. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, lots of opportunities still in July. Hit me up with a DM on Twitter. I'll get right back to you. Tell me what your idea is in a few words, and I'll if there's a kernel of an idea there, we'll talk through it and try and make a show out of it. Always very interested in hearing from new fans, meeting new people. Kyle, thanks again for coming on.
Happy to be here.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.